No, I'm not envious of your money, but I'm damned pissed that you're polluting my nature, because it is mine. It's not yours to destroy. This is my nature, together with 5 million other Norwegians. We own this nature, and you're not allowed to pollute it like you do. We want the pollution to stop. We can't look in their grandchildren's face when they in 40, 50 time year from now tell us, what the fuck were you doing? You messed up my nature. What should I live upon now? I have nothing. Because you fucked it up because you let some greedy billionaires get even more rich.
As a Norwegian, to sort of look and see that Norwegian companies are being so cynical and just destroying other countries' environment and ecosystems to make more profit. It's embarrassing.
Así entre 2003 y 2013, después desapareció 3/4 de la abundancia de estas especies.
They are causing a number of problems, and by far the biggest sinner, I think, and as all the research show as well. Now I just read that they are trying to change the researchers because they are coming up with the wrong answer. So that's their way of solving the problem, just replace the scientists. I'm happy that people are starting to wake up and see all the problems they are causing, not just in Norway. You know, it's South Africa, in Chile, Scotland, Iceland, you know, it's everywhere, and they are going to escalate it, so it's going to be even worse. We have to stop it.
Pero no cree que ya el tema de izquierda-derecha ya es del pasado, ahora tenemos que unirnos para defender nuestra naturaleza y nuestro patrimonio.
Pero por supuesto, pues esa debería ser la voluntad de todos los seres humanos que habitamos el planeta.
Yo no canto por cantar, ni por tener buena voz. Canto porque la guitarra tiene sentido y razón.
Nature is wonderful. The eternal snow that crowns the mountains melts in the summertime, forming rivers and lakes that nourish an immense diversity of flora and fauna. That pure crystal water not only sustains life, it also delights our senses. It's a perfect and necessary cycle, a secret pact since the dawn of time, one where water returns to its source, the ocean. An incredible variety of creatures live in the depths of the ocean. Fish, crustaceans, corals, algae, an almost infinite biodiversity. The sea provides for all of them, birds, fish, shellfish. Every creature benefits from its abundant fruits, just as we humans can enjoy its generous produce every day in the markets. And savor and enjoy delicacies as participants in this great celebration. But the celebration is in danger.
Vamos a ir a otro tema. Serena Pesca alertó que varias salmoneras en el sur del país han activado planes de contingencia por la muerte masiva de peces en las regiones de Aysén y de los lagos.
At least 5,500 tonnes of salmon was dumped at waste facilities last month, killed by a strain of bacterial disease they hadn't been vaccinated against. The mass mortality event has hit Huon Aquaculture and Tassals farms in the D'Entrecasteaux Channel.
Al menos 800.000 salmones escaparon de un centro de cultivo en la región de los lagos, provocando la preocupación de las autoridades, quienes advierten que las especies no son aptas para el consumo humano por estar recibiendo un tratamiento con antibióticos. Sin embargo, pescadores en Puerto Montt ofrecían el kilo hasta en 800 pesos.
Más de 5.500 toneladas de salmones muertos debieron ser retiradas en las últimas horas de la sureña región de los lagos en Chile. Las autoridades confirmaron el lunes que la catástrofe ambiental se debe al crecimiento de una marea de algas nocivas, producido según expertos por el cambio climático y la salmonicultura irresponsable.
So what's happening? The sea is being suffocated by pollution. The red tides are no longer occasional, they're constant. Chile and Patagonia and other ecosystems are overflowing with plastics, chemicals and antibiotics produced by the salmon farming industry, which is growing unchecked while the authorities do nothing. Biodiversity is declining. Fjords that once teemed with life are now underwater cemeteries. Ecological disasters are becoming more frequent. Massive fish deaths. But what's causing these changes? The communities impacted by the salmon industry are now starting to protest against an industry that's committing crimes against nature. But even though sustainable alternatives exist, the industry refuses to change. Greed is destroying our heritage and endangering our future. This isn't normal, nor is it acceptable. Time is running out and it's time to take action. My name's Roberto Yekye Quintas. I'm a citizen of two worlds, Chile and Sweden. My interest in sustainable development began in the early 90s, when I graduated as an industrial civil engineer from the Federico Santa Maria Technical University in Chile. Years later, I advanced my knowledge in this field by studying an MSc in Environmental Engineering and Sustainable Infrastructure at the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden. When I learned that the salmon industry was expanding into the southernmost areas of Chile and Patagonia, polluting protected areas and national parks, breaking the law by overproducing, it caused the alarm inside me to go off. Chile and Patagonia, one of the most beautiful and pristine regions on the planet, with unique ecosystems and breathtaking landscapes, is in mortal danger. This is why I decided to investigate the issues of the salmon farming industry thoroughly. With this in mind, I took my motorhome and embarked on a journey from Stockholm to Norway, the world's largest salmon producer. My aim was clear: to establish whether Norway used sustainable practices and to understand, from the ground up, the true impacts of this industry. I interviewed scientists, NGOs, and fishermen. I wanted answers to urgent questions. Is Norway facing the same environmental challenges as Chile? What are the actual impacts of the salmon industry? Are there any good practices? But I didn't stop there. I travelled to my native country, Chile, the second largest salmon producer in the world, to find out how they mitigate the impacts of this industry. I didn't just want to analyse figures or studies that, while valuable, are often superficial. I wanted to see with my own eyes the reality that nature and the people living in affected areas are experiencing. I wanted to hear their stories, their struggles, their fears and their hopes. I wanted to witness the reality. I also had the privilege of travelling to Poros, a beautiful island in Greece. where I participated in a conference that brought together people from all over the world that are passionately committed to fighting against the development of open net fish farming. During the event, I had the opportunity to speak with NGO representatives and leading scientists, exchanging ideas and strategies to tackle this global issue. I'm inviting you on a journey from darkness to light, ex umbra in solem, in the words of my alma mater's motto, in defense of the most precious thing that we have, our nature, the source of life itself. My first stop was Bergen, a picturesque coastal city west of Oslo. The location of the headquarters of the world's largest salmon producer, Mowi, formerly known as Marine Harvest. I was surprised by the simplicity of their facilities, hidden behind a row of abandoned buildings. Their offices seemed to prefer a low profile. Once there, I parked my motorhome and had the opportunity to meet Rune Jensen, the leader of an NGO that's fighting passionately for the survival of wild salmon, a species whose existence is increasingly threatened by the salmon farming industry.
So we are here outside the Mowi headquarters, no?
Yeah, this is the Mowi headquarters. Doesn't look like much. It is running all the businesses in Chile, in British Columbia, Scotland, Iceland, Norway. So because they are creating jobs in the rural districts along the coasts of the world, but these jobs actually come with a huge cost for the local coastal ecology. And the cost is the pollution. And the pollution is costing the wild fishermen, the lobster fishermen, and even the ecology, and even small sea creatures like zooplankton, and everything is being disturbed, and at a level and a rate that is unheard of. People tend to not understand the magnitude of the pollution.
Organic pollution. One of the main issues with aquaculture is that the pollution it causes is invisible. At first glance, everything seems clean and proper. In some cases, the floating cages even give the impression of being artistic installations. However, the reality beneath the surface is very different.
When you talk about organic pollution, how big are the numbers? So the thing is, you can compare one average size fish farm and how much organic waste they let out. It's the same as putting a barn, a floating barn with 6,800 cows that is shitting directly into the ocean. So whenever you see a fish farm, an average size fish farm, imagine a barn with 6,800 cows shitting everything directly into the ocean. That's the cool and cold, hard facts and reality.
To measure the impacts of the salmon industry on the seabed, Norway's environmental organization Green Warriors conducted a research trip in 2016 aboard a vessel equipped with cutting-edge technology that could film at great depths.
We spent 2 months investigating under 40 fish farms, and the national TV didn't even show it. And they were invited to come on board, they were invited to take place, they were invited to everything, and we communicated, we sent them the videos, and nothing, not a word. Because we invested a lot in investigating this industry. So we've been filming underneath a lot of fish farms. Here is the official numbers. The blue is very good condition on the seafloor. You would sort of look for seashells and starfishes and things, right? And green is good, and yellow is bad, and red is very bad. You can see here there is a tiny little dot with red, tiny little yellow one, and a big blue one, which is very good. That's the shellfish and stuff, right? And let's see in the video when we compare it to what we find when we are down there. So this is under the farm. This is the number of the farm. This is the depth, 102 meters. This is very good condition. So this is the fish shit. And you see in some of these bubbles of gas coming up from the mud. And those bubbles are methane and hydrogen sulfide, which are made when there is very bad conditions on the seafloor. Things are decomposing without oxygen. And now we are 57 meters from the plant. This is in 108 meters. This is a new location. So that it hasn't been here for a long time.
So you cannot trust any of this information?
Not at all.
I was genuinely shocked. I'd always thought that developed countries like Norway protected their natural environments. Who would have imagined that such a prosperous nation, with its majestic fjords and glaciers, rich in oil and with no economic urgency, would allow the destruction of its own natural heritage? In disbelief, I decided to visit Mowi's offices personally to listen to their side of the story. They denied me a formal interview but agreed to an informal conversation. While I listened to what they had to say, I recorded the conversation, fully aware of the importance of documenting every detail.
We checked the status of the bottom before, during, and after every production cycle, right? And then it's graded. So 96% of sites in Norway would be good or very good, according to the environmental authorities in Norway.
But I hear also that some environmental organizations, they have been digging in the places where they authorities say it is good, and it's not good at all.
Yeah. I'm sure there can be sites that, but it's demand by law.
It's possible that the measurements from Norway's maritime authorities are not entirely accurate. But we also need to ask ourselves another question. Is it really likely that 96% of the marine farms are in good condition after what Green Warriors found? Of the 40 sites they investigated, more than half were found to be in alarming condition. So alarming that they decided to report them formally to the authorities. Yet so far there have been no discernible consequences, and that leaves many unanswered questions. How are the facilities being evaluated? What criteria are being used? And what actually happens to complaints once they're received by the state?
Norwegian maritime authorities said, this is not proof. This can be from wherever. And there will always have some negative effects in producing food. Have you been in a farm of cows? They are also shitting.
All these red dots right here, that's the salmon farms in this area. And remember, every dot represents at least 6,800 cows. But if you compare to if you have raising cows on land, in order for you to raise cows on land, you have to have fields to spread their dirt on it evenly. And of course, the dirt is being absorbed by the soil and it gives for new grass and everything. But if you had 6,800 cows, you need 30 square kilometers of fields to spread it on. And how many fish farms do you see here? Each of them need 30 square kilometers of fields to spread their shit. I mean, the fjords ain't big enough to spread their shit in a way that is not harmful.
To better understand what we're talking about, we should explain what algal blooms and red tides are. In the ocean, sunlight heats the water, and when a large number of fish collect in the same place, their waste and food scraps release nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus. These nutrients accelerate the growth of microalgae, which is known as algal bloom. As the algae grow, they consume oxygen and cloud the water, preventing light from reaching the seabed. This affects the ability of aquatic plants to photosynthesize and further reduces available oxygen. If the process is unchecked, something called eutrophication occurs. The lack of oxygen creates an anoxic environment, meaning one without oxygen. And marine life dies. Some algae even release toxins, which causes red tides, a phenomenon that can be harmful to fish, shellfish, and even humans if they consume contaminated products.
There's been studies that have shown that there's a correlation between the expansion of aquaculture and the recording of harmful algal blooms or red tides in different parts of the world. In fact, in almost every ocean in the world. These particularly fish farms that are fed a lot of fish meal produce a lot of nutrients and produce a lot of organic matter that's then used by the organisms that form red tide. So you produce a lot of nutrients and this organic matter, and these organisms grow very quickly and ironically can end up leading to killing the fish that are helping to generate these red tides.
Cuando uno habla de sustentabilidad tiene que necesariamente hablar de límites, y los límites para la producción de salmones en Chile nunca han estado claros. Básicamente la Ley General de Pesca y Acuicultura establece un concepto técnico que se denomina capacidad de carga. Eso quiere decir la capacidad ecológica, ¿cierto? Biológica, oceanográfica, de un lugar, ya sea un canal, una bahía, un fiordo, de sustentar una cantidad de biomasa de salmón. Eso es la capacidad de carga. ¿Cuánto aguanta el medio ambiente sin deteriorarse? Esa capacidad de carga no está estudiada, no está definida, y la industria del salmón se expandió y se sigue expandiendo en lugares donde el medio ambiente no tiene la capacidad de sustentar salmón.
Era una floración pero terrible. Yo me acuerdo que en esta parte aquí, en la esquina de mi casa, de aquí al final, era una capa así. Fue algo que nunca había visto en el mar y un olor fétido. Fétido, era como si arrojaran un vertedero de caca o de excremento humano en el mar. Yo que vivo en la otra casa que está usted, que está muy a la orilla del mar, eso no se podía abrir ventanas ni nada. Y todo el mar andaba con unas franjas café, como molidillo así, como caca botada en el mar. Pero eso eran peces muertos. Y hubo una mortandad de jureles que usted hubiese visto, el mar era como una olla como en sopa con cosas flotantes. Era asqueroso todo eso y era terrible de ver tanto pescado.
The Comau Field is a natural treasure in southern Chile. It's situated between Homopirén and Caleta Porcelana, where the southern highway is interrupted and only the sea allows passage. Its deep waters lead to Pumalin Park, a legacy of conservationist Douglas Tompkins, which protects ancient Alice trees and unique ecosystems. Yet despite the fjord's great value, its environment is under threat. In remote areas like this, where the state has little presence, the salmon industry has grown unchecked, and many communities see it as an income source without realizing the long-term environmental and social damage it causes. What's most concerning is that technologies that would increase the sustainability of production processes exist, yet they're not applied. There's a lack of science-based regulation, and warnings from experts about the consequences are ignored. One of these voices is Vreni Hausermann, a doctor of marine biology, German by origin but Chilean by choice. She's been living in southern Chile for years, dedicating her life to the study and defense of Comau Fjord. With tireless commitment, she's documented the impacts of the salmon industry on underwater ecosystems, collecting valuable evidence of what the seabed was like before industrial intervention. Though her work hasn't received the attention or support it deserves, her scientific legacy is a beacon of hope. Thanks to her records and her irrefutable evidence, it's now possible to confirm the degradation caused by negligence and lack of regulation.
The first time I came to Comau Fjord was in 2002. I just dived there the first time and was totally impressed by the biodiversity. It was unbelievably colorful and diverse. And I've been studying the fjord for 20 years, but I had to see how things changed over the years. When I came to Comau Fjord, there were only 3 really small farms. But in 2010, there were already more than 10, 15 really huge farms. And at its maximum, there were 23 huge farms. The amount of nutrients, of antibiotics, of chemicals that were put into the water were rising exponentially. Between 2003 and 2013, we saw a strong decline in biodiversity. There were species that we didn't see anymore, like the rock shrimps. There were other species, like the gorgonians, that reduced its abundance by 75% in only 10 years. Other species were really hard to find at all. The corals died off. The Comau Fjord was really well known for its coral banks. The whole fjord, when the walls were vertical or overhanging, was full of coral banks. And in 2012, the coral banks along the inner fjord, along more than 20 kilometers of the fjord, died, and they have not recovered since then. And in the last couple of years, the salmon farms were even leaving Comau Fjord again because there was no oxygen left. And even the fish died because there was not enough oxygen for them. So for a certain time, they used tubes where they bubbled oxygen into the cages. But even this didn't work forever. And so then the farms left the fjord. And a couple of years ago, there was not a single salmon farm in the fjord. And now they are just coming back because there seems to be some oxygen again. But the biodiversity in the fjord has changed dramatically over time.
After witnessing the impacts of the salmon industry in Norway, I suspected that the situation in Chile might be even worse, but I never imagined it would plumb such depths. How is it possible to destroy an entire fjord while ignoring the people who tried to warn us? Why would anyone attempt to keep a dying ecosystem alive by injecting it with oxygen without fully understanding the consequences? An ecosystem of incomparable beauty, home to a unique biodiversity, is being devastated. And what's most outrageous, instead of protecting the people and safeguarding its invaluable natural heritage, the Chilean state seems to have surrendered to purely economic interests. What's the point of laws and regulations if they're neither enforced nor respected? To sound out the position of Semapesca, the government agency responsible for ensuring compliance, I travelled to Valparaiso, determined to get answers, but the interview I'd arranged never materialised. It was only after I'd returned to Sweden and persisted that I finally managed to speak with the deputy director of Semapesca on Zoom.
Estuve hablando con una científica que ha trabajado mucho en el fiordo de Comau y me cuenta que se perdió un 75% de la biodiversidad, está en condiciones anaeróbicas, que ya no hay salmonera ahí, y no se fueron porque las sacaron de ahí, sino que se fueron porque ya no pueden operar, porque no hay oxígeno. ¿Qué pasó con la fiscalización ahí?
No tendría una... Claro, no tendría yo una forma de poder explicar exactamente lo que ocurrió en ese caso. Ahora, en términos generales, podría señalar que la normativa para el control ambiental de los efectos de la acuicultura es, como te digo, en base a esta determinación del nivel de oxigenación del sedimento y se realiza regularmente y todos los centros que se autorizan a operar tienen que cumplir con el parámetro. Eso es lo que la norma contempla y nosotros nos encargamos de que efectivamente ocurra así.
Pero, por ejemplo, estuve en Coyhaique y en Puerto Cisne y me entrevisté con Semapesca de allá y haciendo averiguaciones me digo que no tienen siquiera lanchas propias para ir a fiscalizar y muy poco personal, son muchísimas las concesiones. ¿Cómo pueden hacer un buen trabajo si no tienen ni siquiera lanchas?
Bueno, sí, efectivamente no tenemos embarcación propia. En el caso de las fiscalizaciones asociadas a los procesos de análisis de la condición de los sedimentos, el tema está, controlado o lo tenemos más fácil porque son las empresas que licitaron estos terceros acreditados, estos laboratorios ambientales que van a tomar las muestras, nos llevan.
En mayo del año 2024, nosotros publicamos una investigación que constató la existencia de 95 casos de sobreproducción de salmones solo dentro de áreas protegidas. Esto quiere decir de que si la autoridad autoriza en sus permisos ambientales producir 2.000 toneladas, nosotros registramos que había durante 95 ciclos productivos, se había excedido ese límite máximo de producción por un total de 67.500 toneladas de exceso. Eso equivale a cientos de millones de dólares en ventas y ninguno de esos casos había sido sancionado hasta ese entonces.
Estuve conversando con la organización Terra y me contaban que en las áreas protegidas tienen mucha sobreproducción y al parecer no hay mucha fiscalización de eso.
Disculpa, Roberto, yo por eso te pedía la pauta de preguntas previa, porque la subdirectora debe estar preparada y tener los antecedentes a la vista de las cosas que tú vas a preguntar. Entonces, si quieres abordar una entrevista de cosas más puntuales, me puedes enviar las preguntas que tengas y para poder nosotros poder analizar bien los antecedentes y poder tener esta...
Pero yo me imagino que usted tiene su antecedente porque usted es el trabajo que ustedes hacen, ¿no?
Claro, pero si tú me hablas de denuncias de Terram de sobreproducción, tendría yo que ver qué estamos hablando. Efectivamente, nosotros controlamos la producción y hacemos las denuncias correspondientes cuando detectamos que ha habido sobreproducción en los ciclos y esas denuncias se entregan a la SMA, que es el organismo que en este caso es el encargado de determinar las sanciones que correspondan. Como te digo, está, hay ahí, a ver, ¿cómo te lo explico en términos globales? Nosotros estamos conscientes de que hay una mirada muy atenta a el desarrollo de la acuicultura y sus impactos ambientales. Y sabemos que hay ONGs que están permanentemente mirando para encontrar, para dar digamos, no digo que para encontrar problemas, sino que para estar seguros de que todo se está haciendo correctamente. Y Terram ha hecho varios análisis. Ahí el problema que tenemos es que la información que ellos utilizan para sus análisis nosotros no siempre la entendemos correctamente. O sea, ellos nos piden a nosotros información dura, de datos, y luego hacen unos análisis respecto a los cuales nosotros no tenemos conocimiento de cómo los realizan. Entonces hay ciertas discrepancias ahí.
El año 2003, aprox, hubo una contaminación en la isla de Aldachildo. Ahí se hundió un centro completo. Tienen que haber sido unas 24 jaulas, ya casi listo para ir a cosecha, por contaminación de algas, o sea, mejor dicho, falta de oxígeno. Bueno, ver toda esa mortalidad fue terrible porque que se pierdan así esos peces. Pero yo creo que todo pasa por un tema de no ser cuidadoso con la siembra, como siempre se ha dicho. Hay que ser cuidadoso donde siembra, no poner tanto, ser precavido, porque al final todo esto nos trae a futuro mucha contaminación, como se ve hoy día, que las aguas están contaminadas, pero a no dar más. Y eso es producto del mal manejo. Y uno mismo se involucra porque cuando estáis trabajando tampoco toma mucha conciencia. Solamente se dedica al trabajo y no a ser cuidadoso y decir, o patalear, como se dice ahí en ese momento, y decir, esto está mal. Y lamentablemente hoy día se viven las consecuencias aquí en el sur y se siguen porque por abajo hay mucha contaminación donde se fueron a instalar la salmonera. Bueno, y te cuento que yo trabajé en Punta Buenao, Buraco de Vélez, esos lugares como Planchá, Concha Blanca, quedó todo contaminado. Y es el tema que hoy día hace que que Chiloé esté como está, contaminado.
I tried again to elicit a more concrete response from Cerna Pesca, but they didn't reply. I also tried to interview Aqua Chile, Chile's largest salmon-producing company, but without results. I even attempted to contact the Superintendency of the Environment to understand why it is that companies which break the law aren't sanctioned, but they too refused to meet me. The situation is not only tragicomical, it's also infuriating. In Chile, salmon companies seem to operate with impunity under extremely inadequate supervision, and what's worse, the state doesn't enforce the law against companies that commit offences and infringements. The most alarming aspect is that we're even destroying our national parks, protected areas that should be the final stronghold for preserving the little we have left. If we can't even protect these reserves, what sort of future can we guarantee? To put it simply, if it isn't stopped, there'll be nothing left. Sadly, the scale of the problem is enormous. The overproduction in protected areas alone, 67,500 tons of salmon, is equivalent to the pollution produced by 140,000 cows. To put it another way, this figure corresponds to the waste generated by 700,000 people dumping their untreated sewage directly into the ocean. Imagine an entire city of 700,000 inhabitants discharging its waste straight into protected marine areas. And this is only the overproduction. Why is the salmon industry allowed to get away with it when private citizens would never be allowed to do anything even remotely similar? It's shocking that such leniency is shown to an activity that so directly and massively destroys our natural heritage and ecosystems. It's not just alarming, it's an urgent call to action. The destruction of Patagonia, one of the richest and most beautiful places in the world, is not merely a local issue, it's a global disaster that affects us all. If we don't act now, the damage will be irreversible. Chemical pollution.
But then, of course, you also have the chemical pollution, which is actually even worse. Because the chemical pollution, those numbers are either extremely high, or the toxicity of these substances they're letting out on the sea are so toxic that it's hard to grasp how toxic it really is.
In salmon farms, thousands of fish live crowded together in small spaces, often in areas with little water current. This worsens water quality and creates favourable conditions for sea lice, a parasite that weakens fish and leaves them vulnerable to disease. To combat this, the industry has used large quantities of chemicals such as hydrogen peroxide and other substances with unpronounceable names. Though effective against parasites, the compounds also affect many other marine species, disrupting the ecological balance. Their indiscriminate use has caused difficult-to-measure damage to marine ecosystems that affects crustaceans, larvae, and organisms essential to the food chain. While studies to improve salmon production are common, the most worrying thing is that there's very little research on the environmental impacts of these practices. This leaves a significant gap in the assessment of their long-term consequences.
So when they do sea lice treatment or salmon lice treatment, which really is the best term for it, they also treat the entire fjord.
When we try to tell people about the chemical delicing, people don't really recognize what sea lice is. But it is actually a crayfish. And what they do is they use chemicals that will not allow crayfish to change their shells, so they will die. But crayfish, that's shrimps, that's crabs, that's lobsters. And they do this in open nets. Of course they kill all the other crayfish too.
Bueno, aquí nosotros llegamos hace 22 años que estamos acá. Bueno, yo tiraba una trampa aquí a la orilla, a 12, 20 metros, porque eso es lo que se manejaban las jaivas entre temporadas, porque a veces se van más a profundidad, más envuelven, y yo podía sacar 20 jaivas en una trampa. Y después que pasó esto de lavar peces y tirar química a destajo, poco a poco empecé a ver que ya, y hoy día si yo tiro una trampa, si saco una, es mucho.
For over 40 years, the excessive use of chemicals has made salmon lice increasingly resistant, and mechanical treatments are now being used. This involves suctioning the fish into specialized boats, where they are bathed in warm water of between 35 and 38 degrees Celsius, a temperature that causes extreme shock to the fish. After that, they're exposed to high-pressure water jets to remove the parasites. The process causes severe stress, open wounds, and a high level of suffering. Many don't survive, and the ones that are returned to the sea are more vulnerable to disease.
But then, of course, the sea lice agents is not the only chemical pollution. Because the salmon farms raised in open net beds, they need to keep their nets around the farms to keep the salmon inside. And they need to have free flow of water to kind of hold the oxygen level high enough. So they cannot allow the small sea creatures to start getting attached to the net. And then they use copper to make this happen. Or zinc or other heavy metals compounds. So we worked together with the county governor here in the Westland, it's like the Western Norway, and we looked into their findings, and they found that every fish farm uses in average 1,700 kilos per copper per facility per year. And in the industry in Norway, in general, if I run a shipyard or any industry, there's an absolute limit of 2 kilos of copper that I'm allowed to let out per year. If I let out more than that, then I'm arrested. So how much copper are the fish farmers letting into the ocean per year? The number is so high, and that again, we need to compare it to the number divided by the number of employees. So if you take all the copper used in Norway that are going into the environment, you come up with the number 206 kilos of copper per year per head in the fish farm industry.
It's hard to understand how so much pollution from one industry can be allowed. While it's true that every industry impacts the environment to some degree, the main issue with salmon farming is that it operates in a marine environment that spreads its contaminants in the ocean currents, and as a result it's extremely difficult to estimate the full extent of the damage. The harm caused by the excessive use of chemicals is particularly difficult to quantify, not only in terms of the effects on marine ecosystems, but also due to the impact on human health. As salmon is a fatty fish, toxins accumulate in its fatty tissues, and they're subsequently transferred to us when we consume the fish. And this isn't only a matter of the chemicals used to treat sea lice or the vast quantities of antibiotics used, especially in Chile, or the heavy metals used to clean the nets. There are also contaminants in the pellets used as feed, as many of the ingredients contain pesticides, which also accumulate in the fatty tissues of the salmon we eat. To better understand the effects of these pollutants on our health, I interviewed Annelise Bjerke-Monsen, a physician specializing in childhood diseases and medical biochemistry.
Hello, I'm Lisa. I work with pregnant and lactating women and infants, and we have measured these pollutants during pregnancy and in babies. The problem with these pollutants is because it's fat soluble, it will stay in the fat cells in your body and they have a very long half-life. So if you start to eat this when you're a child, you will have a pretty big store when you're around 25 and ready for your first baby. And This will be transferred through the placenta, through the breast milk to the baby. Like for dioxin, it destroys the semen quality. It's associated with obesity, associated with cardiovascular disease, cancer. And the problem is that as long as people eat this fatty fish, these pollutants will be transferred through generations and cause illness.
Biological pollution.
Wild Atlantic salmon in Norway has been in decline since late 80s, with a change from about 1 million fish returning to salmon rivers to about 400,000 in recent years. And this year we also see a further reduction. And that is in part due to probably climate change that caused a reduction in marine survival, but also local and regional factors, man-made factors. Among the man-made factors, the farming industry is responsible for the major pressures on Atlantic salmon.
The sea lice is killing the salmon. Sometimes more than 50 to 60% of the out-migrating young smolts die because of sea lice alone. That's a huge problem because now this industry is being allowed to take one of my dearest resources, my wild salmon, and to kill half of it on the way out. Actually, the new rules in Norway is that the salmon farm industry are allowed to kill up to 30% of the out-migrating wild salmon.
This year, it happened what wasn't supposed to happen, that the salmon didn't return, or the big salmon didn't return, which caused a big worry, of course, by the government. So they closed 33 rivers within a week, and some of the major rivers like Gaula, where I'm from. It was a shock to a lot of people, really a big wake-up call. Maybe it was needed. It was the right thing to do. The only problem was it happened overnight, so to speak. So it created a lot of problems for anglers and landowners. But I hope that, by doing this, people will understand more how serious the situation really is. This is a wake-up call and a warning call, and I hope that especially media will, use this momentum to tell the average person and tell people why we ended up like this and why the wild salmon is under threat.
So this is the empty historical Sæter pool, which should have been, full of life, full of salmon, anglers by the bank. Now it's just empty. Empty here and almost empty in the river. And that's because all of you are eating this farmed fish. In a normal year, we have around 200 anglers here that stay for 1 week on the fish and enjoy the nature and each other's company. And since 21st of June, it's been empty. The whole valley is empty, and it's a tragedy.
Just as the salmon industry is contributing to the possible extinction of the native Atlantic salmon, in Chile and Patagonia it poses a serious threat to the native Pacific species.
Hoy día muchas especies de las poquitas nativas que estaban quedando aparecen con piojos, aparecen con hematomas, los últimos robalos, los últimos pejerreyes. La intoxicación por dosis de inyecciones a los salmoneros recorren nuestras costas. Y uno ve cómo la biodiversidad se ha ido alterando. Uno ve que antes donde había varias especies que se podían cosechar, hoy día ya no se cosechan, como el pelillo. Eso todo murió, salió a la playa, ya no hay recuperación de esos lugares. Y eso es lo preocupante de esto.
No, el robalo ya no se ve. Yo que no como un robalo, maestro, no sé si hacen unos 4 meses. Yo trabajo con productos del mar más encima. No lo veo porque el salmón lo está extinguiendo. El salmón ahora se mete en los esteros y se come todo el alevín. El alevín, el pescado, el robalo chiquitito, ese que todavía no le sale ni una manchita negra en la guatita. ¿Ya? Después viene el small, que es un poquito más grande. El salmón se está depredando todo. Eso es lo que pasa. Hay que defender esas especies y la única manera que se puede hacer en este momento es que las salmoneras se corran. Porque de otra manera no podemos controlar esa especie. Ahora mire, yo voy para acá, para el lado oeste, que se llama acá la parte del océano de Quellón. Tenemos unos ríos rico en pescado, robalo, entran diferentes especies, pero es por el tema que no existe salmonera. Están demasiado retiradas para que los salmones lleguen a esos lugares.
Claro, porque antes había gaviota en forma permanente acá, porque había alimentación de sardinas, de otras especies que hasta hace pocos años, hace como 3 años aproximadamente, se destinaba todo a harina de pescado. O sea, ya se explotó, ya no queda nada. Entonces las aves ya no están aquí, si antes aquí era puerto de pescadores, hoy día ya no se ven, han emigrado a otros lugares a buscar su alimento, porque todo lo que había fue capturado para harina, para pescado. Esa es nuestra realidad.
Social pollution. One aspect that is frequently overlooked is the social impact of the salmon industry. The vast amounts of resources needed to feed the nearly 3 million tons of salmon produced globally has a social cost that could have devastating long-term consequences. A large proportion of the wild fish caught to produce fish meal and fish oil comes from regions where these resources are essential for the subsistence of local communities. One example is the west coast of Africa, where negative effects are already being observed due to the scarcity of fish caused by overexploitation of marine resources. This issue is also evident in Chile and Peru, where huge quantities of sardines and anchovetas are processed to supply the salmon industry.
Yeah, so at Feedback, we're really concerned about the food feed competition that arises as a result of the farming of carnivorous fish, such as salmon and sea bass. And this is because the farming of species like this requires huge quantities of fish caught in the wild. So currently, about 1/5 of the global marine catch that is taken out of the ocean every year goes to make fish meal and fish oil. And a significant proportion of this, roughly 70%, goes to aquaculture, industrial aquaculture like salmon farming and sea bass farming. And this is problematic because it's taking fish away from people in regions where food insecurity is a problem. So we know that there are big fish meal, fish oil factories in places like Northwest Africa, in Southeast Asia, South Asia, places like India, for example, and in other parts of the world. Also in Europe, we produce fish oil and fish meal in Europe for industrial aquaculture.
The salmon farming industry loves to claim that we have a moral responsibility to feed a starving world. But what they're actually doing is taking food out of the starving people in the world and putting it into the salmon that produces less food for the rich people. That's not feeding the world. But this is not ethical. And what's less ethical is that they actually have the nerve to say something that is so wrong.
So as long as we keep feeding species such as farmed salmon, wild-caught fish, we cannot call this industry a sustainable industry.
Antiguamente yo me acuerdo, 30 años atrás, mucha gente vivía solamente de la pesca artesanal. Y de a poco se lo fue metiendo la industria. De a poco, y hoy en día tenemos eso, que la industria se está apoderando, que ha sido del historial del pescado artesanal. Y de a poco lo va eliminando. Y los que quedan con salud todavía están prestándole servicio a ellos. Enterarme que no hay pejerrey, que no hay róbalo, que no hay lisa, lenguado. Cosas que antes, cuando niño, eso era súper abundante. Entonces, eso me preocupa. Por eso digo, hay que hacer algo. Pero si seguimos así y si no se hace un estudio acabado, vamos a terminar con los salmoneros a decir, ¿sabes qué? Nos vamos, esto no es productivo. Pero cuando no sea productivo, no va a ser productivo ni para ellos, ni para mí, ni para nadie.
The solution. After more than a year of research, including interviews in Chile and Norway, I returned to the north of Norway to research a company that's transforming the salmon industry with practices that enable a lower environmental impact. In hopeful expectation, I drove my motorhome to Brønnøysund, the location of the pioneering company Aquafuture. Aquafuture started as a research project focusing on semi-closed systems, and with much perseverance, it has become commercially viable. In Norway, I interviewed the CEO of Aquafuture, Thomas Myrholt, to learn about their processes and assess whether they've genuinely succeeded in reducing the environmental impacts caused by the salmon industry.
Yeah, so this is Hamsundet, the third site that we built. It was finished in 2018. And right now there is 700,000 fish here. They're about 3 kilos and will be harvested this Christmas. The main difference with this salmon farm is that the fish is kept in a closed bag. So this bag creates a bowl that we have the fish in, and we fill that bowl with fresh water from 25 meters of depth into the bag. The advantage of doing it like this is that we are protecting the fish more. So we don't get the parasites in here, and we're also more protected against diseases. The waste is filled with nutrients. It's phosphorus and nitrogen. We would like to use that for new value streams and give it value instead of thinking of it as waste. We have 2 ways of doing it. One is that we drive the wet sludge to a biogas plant with big trucks to produce biofuels. So it's actually running the buses in Trondheim city. At this site, we are, since it's very difficult logistic to get the wet sludge out by truck, we have our own dryer where we dry the sludge to a fine powder, and we use that for organic fertilizer.
If we have been a traditional producer of salmon, we have dumped around approximately 30 tons of wet sewage out in the sea. And then you can calculate 4 weeks, you can use 52 weeks. And then we start to talking about a lot of tons that are not supposed to be in the sea.
The feed consists of like anchovies and pelagic fish, so fish oil, fish meal, but a lot of plant-based materials as well. When we were investing a lot extra in the feed, we weren't able to sell the fish in the premium segment because we're not big enough to harvest all year around. Our problem then was, we're too small to brand our own salmon, and then we're not getting paid back the extra cost that you put in feed. So now we're using a fairly standard formula that the whole industry in Norway is using. It's a point to try to be a net contributor, like not use more fish to produce the kilo of fish. That's the wrong way about it. It's a lot more expensive to build these kinds of farms. But at the end of the day, when you have harvested the fish, since we have much less mortality and the fish grows quicker, and the fish that we harvest have a lot better quality, the overall cost of producing in this way is no more than the average in open nets.
This innovation represents a degree of hope that progress can be made in the effort to ensure a more sustainable salmon industry. Although challenges remain, such as the composition of the salmon feed, this type of technology introduces significant improvements on the current open sea farming model. But what's the view of the traditional salmon industry that still operates with open net systems in the ocean? To answer this question, we return to our interview with Mowi, the world's leading company in this sector.
So then we see that salmon farming, compared to other animal protein producers, are extremely sustainable. So when you look at energy use, when you look at the climate impact, when you look at freshwater use, when you look to the environmental footprint we leave, if you compare that to all other animal proteins, you can't find any more sustainable way of producing food.
After learning about the real impacts of the salmon industry, we can no longer turn a blind eye or allow ourselves to be misled. The truth is unavoidable. An industry that operates with open net systems in the sea can never be considered sustainable, especially when more than a kilo of wild fish is sacrificed just to produce a single kilo of salmon. The continuous release of nutrients into the sea, the loss of biodiversity, and the overexploitation of marine resources are serious issues that threaten the health of our oceans and with it, the balance of our beautiful planet. We can't allow what happened in the Baltic Sea to happen again. This smaller and shallower sea has reached a critical state. The excessive nutrients, the overexploitation of its resources, and the chemical pollution it suffers have brought it to the brink of collapse. An ecosystem that was once rich in cod now harbours hardly any fish at all, and the few that are left are unfit for human consumption. Eating Baltic fish more than twice a year is not recommended. We have to learn from this sad story to ensure that it doesn't repeat itself. We have to apply science-based evidence that guarantees a sustainable outcome over time. We still have time to protect our oceans and change course.
No tomemos a la acuicultura como un concepto negativo, ya, porque es una herramienta muy poderosa de alimentación para el mundo. Se puede generar acuicultura en muchos lugares del mundo o en otros lugares, mejorando algunas tecnologías, pero enfocados en sustentabilidad. Poder tener organismos que produzcan proteína, pero basados en el fitoplancton, en las microalgas. No peces carnívoros o moluscos que sean carnívoros, sino que sean sustentables en el tiempo. Por eso, reitero, no estigmatizar que la acuicultura es salmonicultura, porque eso no es así. La salmonicultura es un pequeño trozo de lo que se puede hacer en cultivo y mucho más sustentable que lo que es la salmonicultura u otros cultivos de peces que sean carnívoros o estén en la trama trófica superior. Siempre tienen que ser avicultura de organismos que estén en la trama trófica en la parte inferior. Así que eso, la avicultura es el futuro de la alimentación.
The consumer can make decisions what they buy and what politicians they vote for. And this is the only way we can change things to the better. And this is also how we have to deal with climate change, with biodiversity loss. We have to choose the people who make the right decisions. We have to buy the things that don't contaminate, that are better for the environment.
A los consumidores, si no saben bien la procedencia de cómo se cultiva el salmón, de cómo se procesa, las malas prácticas, que piensen bien antes de consumir. Hoy día tengo entendido que un kilo de salmón cuesta aquí en Chile, bueno, aquí dentro de la comuna, 8.000 pesos. Y un congrio que no tiene química para nada, porque todo ha sido libre, está como a 4 lucas. Entonces, eso es no saber. Eso no es saber qué está comiendo.
My journey is coming to an end, but the pain won't go away. It hurts my soul to see how much damage we've allowed people to inflict on the sea, our greatest treasure, and for so many years. And yet there's still time if we act now. The solution starts with us. Say no to these products and raise your voice to demand that the authorities stop the pollution and force companies to shut down their cages. The people of Canada have already spoken out and succeeded in getting their government to take action. By 2029, there will be no open net cages in their seas. Unfortunately, the original commitment was to eliminate them by 2025 and implementation was delayed. But we can't afford delays when it comes to the health of Patagonia or the well-being of its people. It is true that all production leaves a footprint, but the sea has no borders or walls to contain the damage. Unlike dry land, where pollution can sometimes be controlled, the sea carries the impact much further, to places where our hands can't even reach, but our decisions certainly can. We, the consumers, hold the power to turn the tide. Next time you buy salmon, ask yourself where it comes from. Insist on wild salmon only, or salmon that's farmed in closed systems. And not only that, demand that our leaders stop selling out to economic interests and start protecting what sustains our very lives. We can't allow greed to jeopardize the health of our planet. We owe a duty to future generations. What sort of legacy do we want to pass on to them? If we don't take up the fight today, they may never experience the generosity of the sea as we've known it. The sea is suffering. Can you hear its cry? It's a moan, a call, a scream we can no longer ignore.
Yo no canto por cantar, ni por tener buena voz. Canto porque la guitarra tiene sentido y razón.